Hey, Gemsters, and welcome back to another segment here on the podcast. For those of you that are new, I want to thank you so much for tuning in with Joe Myers and myself. For those of you that are consistent listeners, welcome back. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about who Joe is, and then we're going to dive into a powerful conversation. So get ready to learn and go on a journey with us. Joe is an entrepreneur and business owner and someone who has worked in corporate America. He has decades of real world education that he shares with households and or businesses owners to improve their financial future. His goal is to help people understand the financial oppression in America today and what we can do to combat that at the household and business level. His late mentor would always say most people today spend more time planning a vacation than their financial future. Boy, if that's not the truth, I don't know what is. And today, I want to just sit here and have a great conversation with Joe around like financial aspects from a holistic level. But before we do, I want to welcome the man behind it all, Joe Myers.
How are you doing today? Thank you for having me on your show.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you so much for coming on to share and hold space. Before we dive into your subject matter expertise, I definitely need you to connect with the audience in a fun and personal manner. We could either do so by a rapid fire 10-question game, emphasis on rapid, or an icebreaker. What are you in the mood for?
Let's try an icebreaker.
Okie dokie, y'all. We're breaking the ice with Joe. I want you to share something that you have done in your life that others from the outside looking in may think it's crazy, but it actually built your character and helped you develop personally and professionally.
Hmm. I think this is actually one of them because I'm not one to be in front of a camera, to be honest with you. I just try to put myself out there, but this is out of my comfort zone for sure.
Okay, so I love that you said that because I was just like you in 2020 when I started this podcast. It was just strictly me talking into the mic, no interviews. I was just solo by myself. And I said, you know what? I don't want to go on camera because I don't want to get all dolled up. I'm not a makeup person or, the optics or whatnot. But I said, you know what? Your tribe who's going to gravitate for you is already going to be there. So all you have to do is start and worry about the rest later.
And that's a pretty good way to look at it. And that's what I've tried to look at as well, that, I'm out here to present the information and try to give people, some sound financial advice. And hopefully, it resonates with people.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing that. Now let's zoom into the segment, which is financial, because I feel like personally, this is an area that we could all do better in, me included, y'all, because number one, you can't have wealth without help. Number two, what's the point of having wealth if you don't know how to steward your finances in a way where your money is working for you and you could actually see the fruits of your labor? So that's what I like to say. And Joe, I know you spent some time talking about the difference between money and currency. So I want to dive into what you mean behind that.
Well, I think the easiest way to explain that is from 1834 to 1933. 1 troy ounce of gold was equal to $20.67. So you could take a $20 bill or a 1 ounce gold coin into a fine clothing store in 1910 and buy a very fine suit. Fast forward to today, you can't do that with a $20 bill, but that 1 ounce gold coin, spots running anywhere between, in the last year or two, between $1,500 and $2,000 an ounce. So say you got $1,500 for your gold coin today, subtract the $20, you've lost $1,480 of purchasing power since 1910. So the real money is the gold and silver, precious metals. Our currency is the paper dollars. Now, whenever it was backed by gold or silver certificates, it was worth something. Today, our money is really only worth what we, the people, think it's worth and what we're giving value to it. Because it's not backed by anything. In 1971, Nixon completely removed us from the gold standard. So our money doesn't have the value that it does. And that's why there's a lot of concern about the world reserve currency that the US dollar is right now, but whether it will maintain that.
Okay. And then from that's actually really good because I had no idea behind that. So now thinking about the currency today and thinking about it no longer being backed by the gold, do you have any thoughts on why this was done?
Well, in 1933, FDR removed us from, or he actually changed the gold standard from, basically he made it illegal for Americans to own gold, which is unconstitutional because that's true money.
Wow.
But he made it illegal for Americans to own gold. They were to turn their gold in exchange for paper dollars. Well, whenever he did that, right after he changed had everybody turn their real money in, he changed the gold standard from $20.67 a troy ounce to $35 a troy ounce, meaning that their purchasing power was instantly devalued because of just that one simple act. Now it's kind of strange too, because Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971. And I think it was 74 whenever Ford made it legal for Americans to own gold again. Well, why would you do that? Why not? It shouldn't have been illegal anyways. In fact, that really was an unlawful or an illegal order, which was not really lawful, but it was really never challenged, unfortunately.
And it's definitely good to know the history behind it because once you know the history behind it, you have some more appreciation. And for those of you that may be worldwide listeners, FDR is Franklin D. Roosevelt. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Correct.
And I'm so glad that you shared that because then we who are listening and consuming this education can definitely go and do our due diligence to learn more about this area because it's part of one of the core pillars is to educate ourselves. And when we educate ourselves, we can do better in the area of financial literacy, financial stewardship, and just overall with our finances and how we manage that. Then also too, the difference between money and currency, do you think there's any other differences that you want to share with the public today that they should be mindful of?
Well, with that, we've lost actually 90% of the purchasing power of our dollar since 1913, since the Federal Reserve Act was created. That was the real entity that basically, whenever the Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, that was actually fraud. So the Congress and the Federal Reserve have perpetrated fraud against the American public, because if you look at Article 1, Section 8, I think it's clauses 5 and 6, that we told Congress, you've got to establish weights and measures for our money. So basically create value. And then the other clause was you're supposed to prosecute counterfeiters. Well, whenever they passed the Federal Reserve Act, that actually allowed them to illegally counterfeit money, because bank loans today, the majority of the bank loans are complete fraud. So that's what causes the inflation. Nothing's really getting any more expensive. It's just taking more of the diluted dollars to buy the same thing today that it did 20, 30, 40 years ago.
So that drives me to inflation. But before we dive into inflation, I want to ask a question here that the audience may be wondering. So is your background in finance or economics, or did you go to school for this, or was it something that is just a passion of yours that you learned?
Well, I'm 61 now. Whenever I was around 21, 22, I ran into a gentleman in a store. I'm originally from the Pittsburgh area. Somehow the Federal Reserve came up. I can't even tell you how it came up, but the Federal Reserve came up and he said, well, do you know it's not a government agency? At that time, I didn't know that. Well, this is how long ago it was. He handed me a cassette tape and he said, go home and listen to this. Well, the gentleman that was giving the speech on the cassette tape was G. Edward Griffin, who since had written a book now. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island. He explains the whole mess with the Federal Reserve, how it's affected, not just the United States, but other countries, and what we're doing, what has happened, to our monetary system and how it's devalued our dollar, kind of what I've been explaining. But he goes into great detail of actually how it's affected world wars. It's really a very fascinating book. And back whenever I listened to that cassette tape, that was long before he wrote the book. So ever since I listened to that recording, I've researched everything, about the Federal Reserve and about G. Edward Griffin, because he was a very knowledgeable person. And so it's been a self-study. Never, went to school for it. Unfortunately, I think today we don't have so much education systems today. We have a lot of indoctrination systems, because people aren't taught true education. They're taught what is want to be taught. That's why most people don't know about the Federal Reserve. It's not taught in schools.
And I think we could do a better job if we were to bring this into the education system, just to educate some of the younger folks on what's out there. That way they can learn for themselves, whether they get the information that's presented to them, they build upon it, they research it, and etc. Because also financial literacy is not really taught in schools as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I definitely wanted to make sure I asked that question in case any of the audience members were concerned there. And then let's talk about inflation, because we keep hearing the word inflation, and people feel like we're in inflation right now because things are going up. And then we also have shrinkflation. So you're paying more for an item that used to have a higher quantity, but now that item is higher with a lower quantity. So can you talk about what inflation really is?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I've explained about the gold standard and the difference between the dollar today and the dollar back in 1910. What's happening is, whenever, like in the banking system today, every time a loan is created, so I guess the easy way to explain it, say a person went in and borrowed $100,000 and for whatever, and they go and give that to the person that they were going to buy whatever they were going to buy. Now that person puts that in the bank. Well, now the bank can then fractional reserve lend that $100,000 that that person put in the bank. So then they take and buy something else with it, and whatever they give to somebody else, they can now fractional reserve that. It's just a perpetual, Ponzi scheme, really, and it's actually worse than a Ponzi scheme, because really a lot of the dollars aren't even there. So that's the real essence of what's really going on, and why it's such a problem. Because now the gold standard, while we are not on a gold standard, technically in the United States, every world currency is dictated by gold. That's why gold rises and goes up and down, because that's what the true measure of inflation is. I'm not sure when the last time it was below $1,000. I can't remember what year that was, but now it's up, but almost up to 2,000 this year. So that fluctuation shows you what people value in the currency. So if you wanted to buy a gold coin today, 1 ounce gold coin, and you went to a coin shop, you'd be paying anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 an ounce. So that's what is the measurement as far as what really the inflation really is.
So then, just breaking it down in terminology, would you say inflation, just easier, is when our currency is not worth as much as it used to be, but the price of everything around us in today's environment is rising, causing it to have these bust and boom cycles?
Correct. But the caveat to that is the prices are going up because the dollar is being devalued. Because every time, it's kind of like if you and I were printing money in our basements and our in a room, and then putting that in the economy, well, that's diluting the dollars that are already there. So now those dollars are inflating the price of things, and that's what the real price of things going up. Because if you look at statistically at the price of things, if you factor in the gold standard to it, nothing's really has gotten any more expensive. An example I use is, for example, in 1970, you could buy 10 candy bars for $1 bill. Fast forward today, you can't do that with $1 bill. Now, if you look at the candy bar manufacturers since 1970, they've automated their plants. They've created more candy bars with less people. So the candy bar should really be cheap, but it's not. And that's why, is because our dollars keep getting diluted. The more, and the boom and bust cycles are whenever the banks raise and lower interest rates. Whenever they raise the interest rates, they're trying to contract the money supply, so to have less money in the economy. whenever they're lowering them, they're wanting more money and they're putting more money in the economy because people are going to the banks to loan more money at a cheap interest rate. So that back and forth is what causes the boom bust cycles.
And we're definitely going to dive into that because we're actually seeing that right now with the auto industry, with the mortgage industry, and et cetera. But then I want to also share something for those millennials or those people in my age group. And by the way, Joe, before I forget, you look great for 61. So
Well, thank you.
I am in my early 30s. And I remember in the 90s, whenever you could go to the gas station, like Stop and Go or wherever, and get those little chiclet gums for 10 cents. You
Right,
can't even find anything for 10 cents now, y'all. So
right.
if that does not give you a visual representation of what we're talking about in today's conversation, you definitely need to go out there and do some research so you could begin to connect the dots, just so you have enough knowledge behind what's going on in today's environment. Because when you have knowledge, you have a wisdom, and that wisdom is going to take you a lot longer in life than if you were just subjected to television, which it tells you a vision of what they want you to know and hear.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. On my website, tavaldi.com, there's a page called the call to action page. If you scroll to the bottom of that and people enter their name and email address, they can watch a webinar that was by my late mentor, Nelson Nash. He explains the process that we teach, but he really gives a good explanation of what inflation really is, so people can really get the idea. He goes into explain of what the cost of things were years ago, and it gives a real detailed explanation.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because I think that's a really great resource for them to connect the dots. And we'll recap that again when we get later on in the segment. But now I want to talk about, let's go into the cause, what caused the boom and the bust cycles in our economy, because this is the big thing right now. People don't want to buy houses because the interest rates are in the sevens, whereas before, I think in around 2020, right around the time that COVID jumped off, the interest rates went down to the twos. And then during that time, we saw the market crash and it went to negative 37. Now, fast forwarding, interest rates are in the sevens, cars are not really on the lots, the car prices are a lot higher. People do want to consume and get vehicles, but the price that these monthly payments are, or if they were to buy it outright or cash, it's just so high, it just makes sense for them to just keep driving their current vehicle. And if y'all hear that, that is actually thunder in the background. But anywho, what do you think about that, Joe?
I think you nailed it, and I think that goes back to the banks raising and lowering interest rates. Right now, they're raising the interest rates, so they're trying to contract the money supply, which is now causing a multitude of things. I just listened to Robert Kiyosaki about a month ago, and he was saying that 2024 and 2025, he believes are going to be like Depression era years, because things are going to really get tough, because, the stock market's really going to tank. Last year we had a huge downturn in the stock market, and this year you're having your ups and downs. But I think, the next couple of years you're going to see, I think you're going to see it like back in the Depression, in the Great Depression that we had in this country. We might not see the effects of, like the bread lines and stuff that they saw back then, but I think we're going to see some hard times coming, and it's going to affect a lot of things that you're talking about. There's on that call to action page, there's also a little TikTok video that I've got on there that a guy did a great job showing what the price of things were in the early 1900s, what they are now, what wages were, what they are now, and just gives gives you a really good snapshot of where we're at right now.
Yeah, and I definitely want to give the audience homework there just so they could vibe with you and I, Joe, because this is so real. Because if you're not aware and you feel like, okay, what you two are talking about just has not affected me, look at the hospitality industry, look at the prices back then to what they are now. Look at the food, the amount that you're paying for your food in the grocery store. Ask yourself, the amount that you pay for a loaf of bread, is it the same what you're paying now? Milk, eggs, some of your staple supplies. Or for those of you that are vegetarians or pescatarians, look at the price of veggies and fish. Then
Right.
also think about automobile. We just talked about that. Home industry, the mortgage industry, the lending. whether you're renting, you're purchasing, or you're leasing, you can see how the prices of that has changed. Even school, for those of you who have little ones, I have a little one, the price of tuition for school has increased, whether it's primary, secondary, or whatever. My daughter goes to a Montessori school. The price of that is a lot higher than what it was a few years ago because they say due to inflation, they have to increase their prices to pay for supplies, pay their staff, and etc. So that these are all things that y'all should be mindful of. And it's across the board with everything. So I definitely challenge you to go learn more in this area.
Exactly. You said it very well, because I think those are a lot of key points that people, I'd say if people are honest today, they're not vacationing as much as they, this year, I don't think was as big a vacation time as what the years prior were. Like you said, the groceries, people aren't getting as much at the grocery store as they were, last year and the year before last. I mean, it's just really having a huge effect. There's a snowball effect, and I think it's going to snowball and the snowball is going to get bigger, I think, in the next year or two.
So then with all the snowball effect, and sometimes we hear the snowball effect with paying down debt. And you take the biggest amount of your debt and you pay that down, and then you go on to the next one to decrease the amount of debt you have due to interest rate. Well, can that snowball effect be reversed in the saving aspect? Because if you're projecting that we're going to hit the Great Depression, then we need to be mindful of what we're saving and what's our emergency and safety net too.
Correct. Yes. I think that, and I've just got to, put it out there that I'm not giving tax or legal advice, but we do have a lot of information that we share with people. One of the things that people are doing today is having their money in the 401ks and tax qualified plans. Problem with that is you are going to wind up whenever Uncle Sam is going to tell you how much tax he's going to take whenever you go to take that money out at 59 and a half. There's 3 good videos. Again, this is back under my call to action page. There are 3 good videos that were done right after. It's a 3-part series, and it was done right after the 2008 crash. There's experts on there saying that, people that invest in a 401k today will be lucky if they break even whenever they go to take their money out. The hidden fees that are in them. So there's different ways that people can go about, recapturing, and saving for themselves. There's alternatives to the financial vehicles that are out there, and that's one of the alternatives that I teach in my book.
And I'm glad that you highlight on that. So audience, make sure you grab a copy of the book to learn this. But I would also say, since Joe and I are not financial advisors per se, definitely do your research. And whether you're partnering with a financial advisor, a financial coach, or etc., whatever information that you're given, always do your due diligence and look up the information to see, is that a right vehicle for you, your family, and your lifestyle? And is that going to give you a ROI, return on your investment, to yield you the amount that you want in the long run? Because prices are getting higher, and I've heard people say, whether they're in my age group or yours, they're like, yeah, everything's getting higher except my pay. So what would you say about that, Joe?
Well, it's again, it goes back to the inflation part. But what I share with people is my mentor. Since I studied the Federal Reserve for over 30 years, I met my mentor. I guess it's been a little over 15 years ago now. He's been gone for a few years. I realized the concept that he wrote a book called Becoming Your Own Banker. And it showed a concept that I'd never heard before, and it's using dividend paying whole life policies. We don't use any of the universals, the IUL, the VUL, or the ULs, because those shift the risk back to the policyholder. But what the dividend paying whole life does is it helps people build a legacy. And they also can build a cash value. Now they can finance their own cars, their own major purchases, eventually tackle their mortgage. So what people don't realize, and this is something I'll ask people, I said, if you were to add up all the money that you saved and invested up to this point in time in your life and compare it to the money that you've paid for the principal and interest for somebody else's money, or paid cash and lost the future growth of that money, which should be more? And they say, well, definitely what I'm giving to somebody else or paying cash. That's what we're trying to do. We try to shift that paradigm shift and show people how using that dividend paying whole life policy and building a system of those in your lifetime can transform your financial future. Plus, it ends up being a financial vehicle, one that the ultra wealthy have been using for decades, that we have not known about, that Nelson brought. He brought it into the forefront and brought scale to it for the average person to be able to use it.
And I'm glad that you shared that, because when you think about the dividend paying insurance policy, that, am I saying it correctly?
Dividend paying whole life.
Dividend paying whole life insurance policy, and then you think about home equity, where people are borrowing some of the equity from their homes, and then you think about the 401k, where they're borrowing from the 401k to buy some of those big purchase items and then paying themselves back at a cheaper interest rate. Out of these things that are out there, the vehicle, would you still recommend the dividend paying whole life insurance policy over the home equity or the 401k?
Yes, I'll tell you why. During the Great Depression, people that had their money in life insurance still had access to their money, and they were still paying dividends. These companies that we use are over 100 years old. They have to be, the criteria we use, they have to be over 100 years old. They paid a dividend every year they've been in existence, even during the Great Depression, and they're mutually owned by policyholders. They're not stock companies, so they're not tied to the stock market. So they're run for the benefit of the policyholders and not outside shareholders. So that's one thing that it does. Now, whenever banks and insurance companies were going out of, people were losing money in the stock market, and banks were going out of business, people were losing money in banks during the Great Depression. These people still had their money in dividend paying whole life, never had a loss. They have guaranteed growth and they never lose money.
And then sorry about that, I was on mute. So then, okay, thinking about this, I know there's also annuities, whether it's fixed annuities, variable annuities, and some of those are considered some type of insurances in a sense. Would you advocate for that?
Yes, there are certain circumstances where I have used annuities. For example, there was a couple that they were in their 80s, so it was not feasible for them to do a life insurance. No, they could have done life insurance on their kids and things like that, but it just was a situation where for them they wanted to use the annuity. I probably would have still recommended doing a dividend paying whole life, even if it was policies on their kids and grandkids, because they would still own and control the policies. But we try to help people understand what we're trying to accomplish. But at the end of the day, the decisions are ultimately theirs.
Yes, and our goal is to just educate them with the decisions that they can make that may work for them by giving them different options and choices. But it's also up to them ultimately to decide which one works best for their situation, right?
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
And I know we're getting ready to wind down, so I want to jump into the call to action. And we're probably going to have a part two, because I'm sure the audience is definitely resonating with this and is going to want more information. So let's jump into the CTA, which is the call to action. Once they hear all of this nugget and these gems that were shared around finances and financial as a whole, what do you want them to do? And we already know they got to go to that website. So drop that website again.
Yes, definitely go to the website. I put a lot of information on there so people can research it at their own time and in their own leisure. So they don't have to feel like they're under the gun to learn something in a certain period of time. But then, there's, on that page, on multiple pages, there's a call, there's a button that they can press to book a consultation. And then we can go through, we sit down, whether they're a household or business owner, we walk through where they're at and what their goals are, what they want to, aspire to, and, what they want to accomplish. And then, we work out a game plan.
I love that. And the website is www.tivaldi.com, and that's TIVALDI.com. And this will definitely be in the show notes. So there's no excuse for you not to scroll down, tap it, and link in with Joe Myers. And he has a lot of information on that call to action page. So I'll definitely link that one, and they can work backwards there. And Joe, I want you to leave them with a quote around finances that has stuck with you, that helps you become better and better each day.
I think it's another one of my mentors, my late mentor's quotes. He said, "You can lead a person to knowledge, but you can't make them think." And that's kind of where we're at. We want to give you information. We want to try to help everybody, but it's just like anything. We all have to be willing to help ourselves too.
Mhm. And there you have it, folks. You just heard Joe Myers, and I am Miss Genesis Amaris, Kemp, the founder and host. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the podcast. It's available on 40 plus audio platforms, and the video to this can be found on our YouTube channel by going to Gems with Genesis Amaris Kemp. And my big ask is for brand sponsors. If that's you and you want to build a partnership and create synergies with me, reach out and you can learn more information on how we can work together. And it is paid sponsorship. Until next time, peace, love, and lots of blessings. Remember, you are your greatest asset. So don't ever let nobody tell you otherwise.